Hello and welcome to the Piper Street Food Company. My name is Damien and today I'm going to give you my 5 top tips to creating the perfect winter braise. Now this is the way that we do things in a restaurant kitchen so that we can maximise the flavour to give us a beautiful dish to share on a cold winter's day. So I'm going to start by browning my meat here. What I have here is beef shin of beef with the bone, ossobuco. But these principles apply to chicken or to fish or to vegetables or whatever it is that you want to cook slowly so that we can enhance and maximise those flavours. I'm going to start by seasoning this here with a little bit of salt and some cracked pepper. And then into my pan here, I'm using a cast iron pan. I'm going to pop a little bit of olive oil. And then my first top tip is making sure that you brown your meat. And that's going to create a depth of flavour that you wouldn't ordinarily get. Turning that meat into beautiful caramel flavours will help to give you a depth of flavour in your braise that you wouldn't ordinarily achieve. When I'm loading my pan here, I'm sure not to overload my pan, and I'm popping the pieces in one at a time to allow the pan to recover its heat. If you throw everything in at once, the pan will lose its temperature and all the water will start leaching out of the meat and you'll end up stewing in here before you get that caramelisation. Once the meat's in the pan, let it sit for a little bit. Don't be tempted to constantly turn it over and turn it over. Have the confidence to allow it to sit for a while so it gets a nice crust on it, and that will again help to enhance that flavour. And that's one of the tricks and one of the secrets I think in the restaurant kitchen is having the confidence to take that meat as far as you can in that caramelisation process without burning it. Already starting to smell beautiful. If we just have a look here, we can see that browning is already starting to happen here. Again, don't be tempted to keep flipping the meat over. Allow those flavours to start to develop. One of the important things in cookery is to note you can only go forwards, you can't go backwards. So, what we look forward to in the kitchen here is maximising those flavours at each level, creating a new foundation before we go ahead to start the next layer of flavour. Okay, so the meat here has taken on a lot of colour, as you can see. So now we're ready to go to our second step, okay? So the first step is browning your meat. Get plenty of colour on the meat, okay? I'm going to take this out of my pan. You can see there's a little bit of colour going on in the bottom of the pan, and that's all flavour that we're going to unlock in a moment. So out with the meat. At this point here, if there was a lot of fat in the pan, I could just use a bit of paper towel and just blot that out, but there's not a lot going on with this shin of beef. Second, in with my aromats. So I'm going to start off with my vegetables. So I've got some carrots here, some celery, and some onion. I'm using red onion today, and you'll notice that with the vegetables in here, that they're cut into decent sized pieces, okay? And the reason for that is I want those vegetables to hold up at the end. I want them to be part of the dish. I'm just going to take on a little more oil in here, just to get those vegetables cooking. A little bit of seasoning in here as well. Now, the same principle goes here. Okay, now we're going to caramelise our vegetables. We're going to cook our vegetables until they're nice and golden and they've taken on some colour as well. And what's happening in here is the simple sugars in the vegetables are going to turn into caramel, which again is going to add a depth of flavour to our braise here. Okay, if it was fennel, because I was braising fennel, I would do the same thing. I would allow it to take on that colour. If it was a chicken thigh, I would be doing the same things, allowing that colour. All that colour equals flavour. Okay, so this has been cooking now for about 15 minutes. You can see the onions are starting to soften. and I've got beautiful colour happening in the bottom of my pan here. You can see that there's wonderful colour. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to add my aromats, my garlic and some bay leaves. If I was cooking lamb, it might be rosemary. If I was cooking chicken, it might be thyme. And just those flavours that marry and match well together. The reason for adding the garlic now is that because it's much smaller than the vegetables that are there, I didn't want it to burn. So I add it in the last minute or two, allow all those flavours to release, and then from there we can continue on to the next stage. So we'll just cook those out for a little bit. Now my third tip here is to deglaze. Showed you all that beautiful colour in the bottom of the pan. We now want to lift that up and allow that to go through the dish. And that's a really important part of that making a braise, is getting all of that wonderful colour off. Because I've got this wonderful shin of beef, I'm using a fairly bold red wine here. And I'm going to add that in there, probably about 1/2 to 3/4 of a cup. And now I'm just going to lift all of that colour off the bottom of the pan. I'm going to take my time to use my spoon here, and if I could just try and lose some of this liquid here, you can see how that colour is starting to lift by just scraping it with the bottom of the spoon. And we're using a wooden spoon here because we have an enamel pot. But just take a moment here in that deglazing process to lift all of that colour off the bottom of the pan. And once that colour starts to lift and the alcohol is starting to cook out, and that's another important part of what we're doing here, we want to get rid of all of that alcohol raw flavour, I'm going to add in a little bit of tomato puree. Now some recipes you'll see that the meat is floured beforehand and then caramelised, and the reason for that is that flour will help to give the stew or the braise body. I'm using tomato puree here today instead, and that's going to, when the liquid is reduced, that's going to help to give it the body that it needs. So again, we're just going to cook this out just for a moment, taking my time just to lift any more little bits that are stuck on the bottom of the pan and get them incorporated into the dish. And once this comes back up to the boil, then what we'll do is we're going to add the meat back in. Okay, so back in with our meat and any juices that are in the pan as well. Okay, that's all going to add to the flavour. We'll just warm that meat back up there, making sure that everything's fairly level in the pan, and then we're going to add liquid to cover, and that's going to be the braising liquid. Now if you had a beautiful stock, beef stock, you could use that. You could use a chicken stock here as well. If it was fish, you'd be using fish stock and maybe a chicken stock with some lamb. But today, because I've got all of these beautiful flavours here and I've got that wonderful strong meat, the shin of beef, I'm just going to use water, and all of the other things are going to add the flavour to it. In there like so. Now low and slow. Braising is a long, slow process. Don't get home at 6 o'clock at night and pop this on thinking it's going to be for dinner, okay? Maybe dinner the following night. This is a sort of lunchtime sort of preparation so that you can enjoy it for your dinner. You can see all those beautiful colours in there. I've got the bay leaves, all the tomatoes and vegetables just sitting under the liquid. And now on with my lid. You've got a couple of options here. I'm going to turn that heat down. That can just simmer away on the stove, or you can pop it into a low oven, maybe 160, 150, depending on your oven, and that's going to cook for a couple of hours. I would check the liquid maybe about halfway through in an hour or so. Set your timer for an hour, lift the lid, and just see that the liquid is covering the meat and the vegetables that's there. If it has reduced significantly, just top it up with a little bit of water and continue on that cooking process. We'll have a look at this in a couple of hours. Okay, now this has been cooking away here for about 2.5 hours. I checked it halfway through and I added about a cup of water. It'll just come down just a little bit, and I think the important bit there is to make sure that meat's covered all the way through. So let's have a look at what we've done here. Look at that colour there, absolutely beautiful. We can see that the meat is beautiful and soft here. It's starting to fall apart. The vegetables are cooked all the way through. It smells amazing. You can see how the liquid here is starting to thicken with the tomato puree that was in there. It's creating a wonderful gravy. Okay, so what we're going to do now is just have a little bit of a taste, just to check the seasoning. Oh, delicious, absolutely beautiful. Sweet, meaty, wonderful flavour, full of body, screaming for a bit of mashed potato, I think. Okay, so my last tip here is we're going to take this off the heat and we're going to let it rest with the lid on. And the reason for that is, as the meat cooks and starts to fall apart, it opens up, and by resting it in its juices, it allows the meat to soak up some of that gravy, creating more moisture into the meat. Okay, and that's the kind of important bit that we do in a restaurant situation. Okay, so that will go lid on, let it rest, maybe for half an hour or so, or until you're ready to serve. Simply then, heat it up, and I'm going to add some fresh parsley to this, and that's just going to add a bit of liveliness to it, a bit of vibrancy. We'll just sprinkle that on top like so, creating beautiful colour and wonderful flavour. Okay, so let's just recap on what we did here, okay? So 5 tips to a beautiful braise. 1, let's make sure we caramelise the meat and the vegetables as much as we can to create that flavour base there. We're adding in the aromats, we've got the garlic, we've got the herbs, and all of those complementary flavours that you want to add to the meat, to the dish. 3rd step there is to deglaze, making sure we take all of that colour off the bottom of the pan and allowing that to incorporate into the braise or the stew. And again, if it was chicken, we might use a white wine. If it was lamb, we might use a beautiful lamb stock. If it was fish or seafood, we might use a seafood stock. Okay, my 4th tip there is to cover and simmer, slow cook. Okay, this is not something that we can rush, allowing those flavours to develop as the dish cooks along. And that last tip there was just allowing the dish to rest, okay? Allowing the meat to soak up all of that wonderful gravy and juices there to create that beautiful moisture. We've added the herbs in there to add the brightness and the vibrancy, and now all we need is to add some vegetables, maybe some potatoes or some polenta or some rice, depending on what the dish you make. Give it a try at home. It's a wonderful way to create beautiful flavour. It's simple, and one of the things I love about this dish is it's something you can do ahead of time and then just reheat when you're ready to go. Thanks for joining us at the Parker Street Food Company.